My name is Preethika and I'm a registered nurse based in the United States. If you have watched any of my previous videos, welcome back. If you are new to my channel, welcome in general. In today's video, I'm going to be telling you why I left my job as a nurse in the Pediatric ICU and switched to a super different specialty, which I'll be telling you more about towards the end of the video. In order to understand my reasons for leaving the Pediatric ICU, you need to know a little bit of context about why I picked it in the first place and what I specifically am looking for in my career as a nurse, because I know that's different for all of us. If you've watched my previous videos, you probably know some of my story already, but I'm going to share it for those of you who might be new here. I graduated from nursing school about 3 years ago and decided to start my career in the pediatric ICU for reasons, which I talk about in this other video. I will link it somewhere here. I love working in medicine because I find it really fulfilling, but at the same time, I've never wanted a medical career that has consumed my life to the point where I'm not able to have good work-life separation. My dream medical job is one where I can show up to work for a set shift, give my patients the best care I possibly can, and then be able to leave work at work and come home and focus on my family, on my friends, on these creative hobbies like making videos and taking photos and just doing things that I like, and then be able to switch back to work mode when it's time for me to go to my next shift. I'm a big proponent of creating a life where I have work-life separation, and towards the end of my time in the PICU, those lines were getting really blurred. I was taking a lot of the stress of work home and was in general, because of that, not very happy anymore. That's the big picture of where my headspace was at when I decided to leave the PICU. But throughout this video, I'll be talking more specifically about what those factors were and how they drove me to that final decision of switching specialties. Super briefly, before we get into the challenges I faced in the PICU, I want to talk about things I really enjoyed about my job, because there were quite a few of them, and I don't want this video to seem like I didn't like it at all, because that's not true. In my previous video about why I picked the PICU, a lot of those reasons that I listed were the reasons that I really liked my job. I liked that it was a super fast-paced environment. There was so much to learn, and I really did feel like when I was on orientation during that nurse residency period, when I had a preceptor and that support system, I felt like I learned so much and grew so quickly because of that intense environment, and I really liked that. That was one of my favorite things about the PICU. I also really liked the variety of patients we got. I picked a general ICU and not a cardiac ICU or a neuro ICU. I picked a general one because I wanted the exposure to as many types of patients as possible. Even though I wasn't in the PICU long enough to master or become an expert at a lot of those ICU skills, the fact that we got so many types of patients means that I got exposed to a lot of things I wouldn't have been exposed to otherwise. I think all of that exposure has made me a better nurse now, even in this new specialty that I switched to. And of course, I think there's something special and fulfilling about being a support person in a very challenging period of someone's life. And I felt like as a nurse for these patients, I very much was in that space where I could support them both emotionally and medically. So that patient-family connection aspect was also one of my favorite parts about the PICU. Okay, so now jumping into the main part of this video, which is the challenges I faced in the PICU and how they started affecting my work-life balance and ultimately pushed me to switch specialties. I want to preface by saying a lot of the things that bothered me ultimately were things that I didn't really expect to have any problems with. Like, they were very obvious nursing realities that I should have probably thought more about, and looking back on this experience, it shows me how maybe naive and fresh I was not to have put more consideration into these factors. But the first one, it'll seem kind of surface level, but this was something that actually really affected me, was the scheduling. As a new bedside nurse, I think this is true across a lot of bedside nurse positions, no matter your specialty. When you first join a unit, you're rarely going to be put on day shift only. You'll probably either be on straight night shift or you'll be doing some combination of rotating days and nights. When I went into the PICU, was aware of that, but totally thought that switching between day shift and night shift wouldn't be any problem for me. I very quickly realized that's not the case. I am someone who does not do very well on night shift, and I think that's because the sleep schedule really affects the way I'm able to function. The way that it was offered on my unit was you could do 3 weeks of day shift and then 3 weeks of night shift and then switch back and forth like that, or you could do 6 weeks of day shift and then 6 weeks of night shift, switch back and forth. I tried both and really did not like either. It was an interesting reflection point for me because I know a lot of nurses who do just fine on night shift, and I thought I would be the same. But ultimately, I learned from this whole experience that night shift isn't for me, and I would do so much better on a job that was predominantly day shift or preferably only day shift. I bring that up because if you're someone who also struggles on night shift, I just want you to know I totally get it, and you're not weird, and I promise there are nursing jobs out there that are predominantly day shift that you could like. This next next reason for me leaving the PICU, it's a bit of a touchy subject, so I'm gonna try and tread a little bit carefully, but this next reason was the staffing issues we were having. I want to preface by saying, despite the staffing issues we had, I actually feel like I had really supportive managers and leadership during my PICU experience, despite me leaving. When I was on my PICU orientation, it was that in-between period when COVID was coming to an end. A lot of units had nurses who had left to travel nurse, and mine was one of those. When I was on orientation, I knew we were short-staffed, but I was shielded from it because I had a preceptor with me pretty much all the time. The realities of our staffing situation didn't fully hit me until I had gotten off orientation and was on my own. Coming out of nurse residency, having a preceptor and then suddenly not was okay for a little bit, but very quickly started to feel really stressful really fast. It's interesting because I remember on the days that we were properly staffed, I felt like my shifts were just fine. I was able to finish all my tasks and I felt like I was able to process what I was learning and doing. But then on the days where we were short-staffed and I could tell all of us were running around and hectically trying to get things done, those were the days I really struggled with because it felt like I was just doing things to check the box rather than actually processing the why, if that makes sense. And that was hard for me because ultimately it made me feel like I wasn't learning. It made me feel like I wasn't growing anymore. I was more just trying to get through the day. And one of the big reasons why I picked the pediatric ICU in the first place was because I wanted a healthy environment where I was going to grow and develop in, and suddenly because of these staffing issues I didn't really feel like I was getting that anymore. I started to feel isolated, and because of that I was coming to work really stressed. That kind of leads into the next point, which is because of how rough some of my shifts were getting, it started to feel like I was having more rough shifts over good shifts, and because of that it caused a lot of anxiety for me coming into work. I started to get really anxious coming into work because I didn't know what kind of environment or situation I was walking into. Were we going to have enough staff? Was I going to have the support I needed to give my patients the best care I possibly could? That anxiety of coming into work was starting to bleed into my home life. When I was on orientation, I would come to work really excited to learn and excited for the opportunity to be there, but then slowly once I got off orientation and work started getting stressful because of our staffing situation, I started to really dread coming into work. I would get to work early and just sit in my car because I was so nervous. And then what started happening was even on my days off, I wasn't really able to just relax and enjoy. I was always thinking about, oh man, I have to go to work tomorrow. I don't want to go. I was starting to have all these really negative thoughts about my job in the PICU, which is what I've never wanted. I've always wanted a job that I find fulfilling and one that I enjoy and that I'm able to give my all to my patients, but I felt like the environment I was in was no longer helping me do that. A lot of us are nurses because we like to help people, and that's 100% true for me. I felt like I was in such a poor mental space that I wasn't able to give my patients the best care that I possibly could. I don't think any patient deserves to have a nurse who doesn't want to be there, which was truthfully where I was at mentally. So all of that combined is why I decided to leave. The anxiety, the dread I was feeling coming into work, the way that stress was affecting my life outside of work, feeling isolated and not feeling like I had a supportive learning environment anymore, and most importantly feeling like it's not even about me, it's about my patients. Me coming into work this way is doing my patients a disservice, and they deserve to have a nurse who wants to be there. And at that point in time, because of how I was feeling about the staffing and the hours and everything, it just wasn't me. After coming to the conclusion that the PICU wasn't right for me anymore, I met with my managers and they totally understood, which I was really grateful for. I was so worried about them being angry, especially with our current staffing situation, but they were very encouraging, and that made a big difference for how I tackled the next set of struggles of figuring out what I wanted to do next. Where I was at mentally after that, I was really disheartened and discouraged, honestly, because I really thought the pediatric ICU would be for me. But after spiraling a little bit and feeling bad about myself, I realized we are lucky to work in a profession as nurses where there are so many opportunities for us out there. It's just a matter of finding the place for you and the job that fits your lifestyle and makes you feel fulfilled. I realized that it's okay if the PICU wasn't for me. There are so many other things I can look at, and that's where I started thinking about what I wanted to do next. I reflected really intentionally on what about the PICU hadn't worked for me. I also was feeling really burnt out from bedside nursing in general, and I didn't see myself switching into another type of bedside nursing. I felt like I just needed something completely different. That's when I ended up looking into nursing outside of traditional bedside hospital nursing. I looked at outpatient nursing, I looked at research and administrative nursing roles, and then ultimately ended up settling in on procedural nursing. That would include the operating room, cath lab, IR, that kind of stuff. I had a friend in nursing school who had gone straight from nursing school into the operating room, and she had been the only one to do that in my class. So I reached reached out to her and asked her how she was liking it, and she, for the most part, had really positive things to say. So yes, after leaving the PICU, I did a lot of research on operating room nursing. I talked to that friend. I went down a lot of rabbit holes on Google and Reddit and YouTube and did all the research I possibly could, and then ultimately decided like I'm never gonna know unless I try. So I applied to an operating room nurse position at a big pediatric hospital. I decided to stay with pediatrics because I love that patient population and ended up getting the job. I'm now still working at that same hospital in the operating room. I really love it. It's just been the best fit for me. I'm so excited to talk more about that in future videos. Some reasons about why I really like the OR. I feel like it's still a fast-paced environment. I don't ever feel isolated anymore because it's very much a team environment too. I work at a big pediatric hospital where we get a lot of different specialties and traumas, so I'm exposed to new things every time I go to work, and I absolutely love that. And I like that it's not a traditional bedside nursing role. My responsibilities in the operating room are very different than what my responsibilities were in the PICU, and I think that's its own video, but I really like the role I play in the operating room. And ultimately, as difficult as that experience was leaving the PICU, I'm really grateful for it because I wouldn't have found the operating room otherwise. And to say that I'm so much happier here is honestly an understatement. I've worked in the operating room now for almost 2 years, and I don't see myself leaving the operating room setting. I might not be an OR nurse forever, but whatever I choose to do next, I don't want it to be something that takes me out of the operating room, and I wouldn't have learned that about myself if I hadn't made the jump. My biggest takeaway from this whole experience is people say that the grass is not always greener on the other side, but sometimes it is, and for me it was. If the specialty or unit you're at isn't working for you, it's okay, and that doesn't mean you're a failure. It doesn't mean something's wrong with you. It probably just means that it's time to look at some other nursing specialties out there. Again, we're so lucky to work in a profession where we have the flexibility to explore things, and I think it's great to take advantage of that if you're unhappy with where you're at. I hope that this was at least encouraging for anyone who is feeling discouraged about where they're at right now, or maybe at a similar crossroads that I was at with the PICU, deciding if I should switch or stay. Just know that it's okay to explore other things, and pivoting is not always a bad thing. Hopefully this closes the loop on my PICU experience. In future videos, you can expect to see more about my job in the operating room. Thank you guys for watching this video. If you're curious about what a day in my life in the PICU was like, or why I picked it for nurse residency, I'm linking those videos here. Until then, thanks again.